Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to the showdown between the Dwarves led by Runelord and the High Elves who are going to be led by the crazy Pigeon Lady. Although if memory serves, I don't think she's actually on her pigeon, so a little bit disappointed. But you know what guys, without further ado, let's jump right into this match and have some fun. So here in the front line, we're actually going to be going with something very different. So typically when you see Dwarves, you're going to see a lot of miners with blasting charges, maybe a couple artillery pieces to really punish the heavy cav and dragon princes and silver helms of the High Elves. But you know, these Dwarves are a little bit aggressive. We're going to be taking it to our opponent. We have no artillery, so the whole front line is going to be all hammers. And oh, this guy's like beard is like soaking here in the swamps. But yeah, they're definitely having a little bit of trouble fighting here in the swamps. But you know what? They got their hammers. They're ready to party. But 4 groups of hammers. One of them is going to be the Peak Gate Guard here. And if you compare hammers to, let's say, elite sword infantry, like the Swordmasters of Hoeth, let's actually go ahead and look at the stat line. So 48, 48, 36. These guys are 47, so relatively similar in melee attack, and they're also not going to lose that melee attack once martial prowess goes. Lower in the melee defense. Weapon strength is obviously very good, but they do lack that bonus versus infantry. And the charge bonus on Swordmasters is 20 compared to 18, so a pretty decent stat line, but I'm pretty sure in a head-up duel, the Swordmasters of Hoeth will win that engagement simply because their melee defense is so much better. But hammers, if you layer them with like runesmiths, for example, and a runelord, they can be pretty scary because what you do is when the engagement starts, use the Hammer of Carrick Draz on the enemy Swordmasters or Chosen or any other elite infantry you're fighting. It's basically going to put their melee attack to 0, lower their weapon damage. It is very powerful. And of course, you can support with runes. Granted, the High Elves have, answers of their own. They have the Heart of Averlorn, Earthblood, all kinds of stuff like that, but it does help even out the battle a little bit. So the Runesmith's going to be supporting the front line here. Peak Gate Guard in the middle, going to be anchored here at the Runesmith. 2 groups of Thunders just to have answers against dragons and dragon princes and cav because, I didn't want him to have like a big star dragon just fly overhead and be able to get breath attacks with impunity. We want to be putting pressure on those guys. So we also have the Dragonback Slayers here in the back to deal with cav. Thunder is definitely pretty important here. I mean, the hammers may win the front line, but they might also not win that. And if they do lose that, I want to have some Overwatch fire here from the Thunders. We have the Giant Slayers here, another group of Thunders, a Runesmith, and that is pretty much it. So a very elite Dawi army here. Going to be taking it to our opponent instead of sitting back and relying on the artillery. And hopefully it works. For my opponent, he has a group of Dragon Princes coming up and around the far side. That's actually a pretty decent deployment because had I had a cannon, it would have been, pretty... yeah, that's probably why he deployed it so far back. So the cannon wouldn't punish it so much. But he has a long journey around the swamps here. The battle will probably be underway before it arrives. In his front line, it's a combination of Spearmen to absorb the charge. Definitely a pretty good idea because they do have relatively high melee defense. They're expendable. So these guys are going to be taking the initial brunt of the Hammerer charge. On top of that, a couple groups of the Swordmasters of Hoeth. So these guys are going to be the real kind of a difficult unit to get through here, but the Runesmiths will be focusing them with the Runes of Wrath and Ruin and other tools like that. So hopefully that pans out well. Here in the center, he does have the Pyramid Company, and I feel like these guys would trade pretty well with the hammers. I mean, I feel like they would lose in the prolonged engagement, but again, they do have Guardian, and Alariel is on foot, so the Guardian could come into effect there. So looking forward to see how they're doing. And in the back, he does have Sisters of Averlorn, a couple pieces of artillery. So Eagle Claw bolt throwers. He does have 3 of these, and if he just kind of sits them on my Thunders, they could potentially generate some good value over a very long battle. So I like this pick for my opponent a little bit. Personally, I haven't tried it, but I'm actually quite interested to see how it does. So without further ado, guys, let's get this show on the road. So right now, my forces are having to advance, and you can see he is getting some decent focus fire right here from the artillery pieces on the spread armor-piercing mode. Let's see, so it does a little bit of damage to the Peak Gate Guard. It's definitely melting them, and once the Sisters of Averlorn start firing off on these Peak Gate Guard, I feel like that's going to suck pretty bad. So in the meantime, I'm going to be detaching my hammers. They're Dragonback Slayers. You can see they're going to be moving out to face down these Dragon Princes, and also one group of Thunders is going to be facing them off, which is going to force them, if they want to avoid Thunder Fire, to go very, very wide. But regardless, the focus fire is underway. You can see my opponent with his Sisters of Averlorn doing some huge damage to the Peak Gate Guard. So very devastating. The same thing kind of happens to like the Crimson Killas and very elite infantry. So I do use the Master Rune of Negation, which gives a base 44% damage reduction, which is helping them stay alive. But man, there's devastating damage coming in from those high elf AP units. Definitely some very good stuff there added in the Queen and the Crone DLC. So I'm kind of waddling through the swamps. Definitely not fun for the Dwarves, but they're very determined. Many grudges to be settled. I do use the Runes of Wrath and Ruin. So the Master Rune on the Swordmasters, just a lighter one here on the Spearmen. And it is pretty much now time to party. So the Dragon Prince is taking refuge in the trees. It looks like they're going to be charging straight across right now. So realizing they're a little bit far away, decide to fall back. In the meantime, I do get my guys up on the high ground. So these Thunders have a nice little perch here, and they're just going to start shooting down into the valley, trying to take out that bolt thrower. And the fighting is now underway in the front line. So a very ancestral grudge here. The Hammers are going to be engaging with the Swordmasters. I did take some damage on the approach, and the Hammers are taking, quite a beating, but the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin doing some damage, but my opponent does respond in kind with an Earthblood, so very, very good stuff right there. Going to be making that fight very favorable for him. Although he only has 2 groups of Swordmasters, and I do have 4 groups of Elite Infantry, so I'm probably going to win the engagements versus Spears, although the Signs of Mithlon holding well, but you can see the Hammers are still going to be getting through those guys. Over here, this is a very pitched fight as well, as the Peak Gate Guard do fight some Spearmen with the support of the Rune Lord, so hopefully he can satisfy the grudge in there and do some good work, but very close fight. Looks like he's going to be getting around with the Swordmasters. I do use the Hammer of Carrick Draz because I was assuming he was going to engage, but I think he was trying to wrap around. Over here, the Hammers do have the Rune and Negation, and they are chewing through the Spearmen. So yeah, he's going to get a rear charge, which is going to be pretty devastating, but thankfully the Dwarves do have some pretty good leadership. So he is coming in with the Dragon Princes. I had to fall back with my Thunders. I'm going to be turning and facing him here, and I do also have the Dragonback Slayers kind of just pursuing them, and hopefully we can drag these guys down and force them to take a really kind of wide route here, but I'm a little bit vulnerable over here. So I had a bit of a decision. I was like, okay, the Dragon Princes are kind of far away. His backline is doing a lot of damage, and I decided to use my Dwarven Cav. So you can see right here, I do have my Giant Slayers, which they're pretty quick by Dwarven standards. I think they have 40 speed, so he was relatively undefended. He allocated most of his resources to, engaging my Hammers in the front line, which is definitely fair play. I was like, all right, my Dwarven Cav are going to go. I'm just going to weather this Dragon Prince charge. You can see my Dragonback Slayers are scurrying across the swamp as fast as they can, trying to get over here and protect these Thunders, but the Dragon Princes are closing in, and it's looking very grim for these guys. But look at this spread fire mode, actually doing pretty good damage. Doesn't seem to take out a lot of models, but it's causing problems. So a little bit of overkill here. The Giant Slayer is going to chop up this crew pretty bad. You can see these high health Bolt Thrower crews just getting melted. And eventually we will work our way over to the Sisters of Averlorn. So good stuff here. These Hammers completely surrounded. Excuse me. Putting up a great fight here versus Swordmasters. Definitely very proud of their performance. Right here we're working our way through. But the Spearmen of the Scions of Mathlon doing a very good job holding. I was very, very impressed with those guys. Pretty much an even battle across the board. But the Dragon Princes have come in. But I was able to intercept them. So I ran the Thunders towards the middle to close the distance between them and the Dragonback Slayers, but the other group is a little bit vulnerable, so there's going to be some Last Samurai action as the Dwarves do turn about face here, and yeah, this isn't going to be fun, but I love Thunder Volleys, so cool looking. But a couple of the Dragon Princes do go down, but a huge charge going to come in, just do some devastating damage against my Thunders. Dragon Princes obviously having a massive erect charge bonus of 80, definitely not fun stuff, but the Dragonback Slayers are chasing, and every time they do kind of cross after one group of Thunders, the other one's going to be getting some good volley fire. So decent situation at the back line. Very good stuff from my opponent here. He does use the Star of Averlorn here to buff up his Swordmasters, making them last quite a bit longer against these Hammers and the Runesmith, who were actually winning that engagement pretty well. Right here in the middle, the Peak Gate Guard fighting down to 22 models, but eventually going to get through those the Pure Main Company, and Pure Main Company doing really well here. But the Peak Gate Guard, as you guys saw, were very, very tattered from some of that focus fire. So my Dwarven Cav were able to clean up 2 Bolt Thrower crews. I think, yeah, they got this one and this one, and now it is time. It is Gotham's Reckoning. The Giant Slayers are going to come in and karate chop these Sisters. So hopefully they can get through them. These things have just been doing massive AP damage the entire game. And my opponent, of course, with some good micro here, is going to be running away as soon as he gets pressured. Sisters are pretty quick. They're slower than the Slayers. You would think they'd be a little bit faster, but the Giant Slayers, they got the wheels. They train that cross-country running. I guess Dwarves are natural sprinters, so that makes sense that they're able to catch them on the burst. The Runesmith in here is also going to be pressuring the Spearmen, so we have a bit of a pit fight here. The Sisters of Averlorn falling back across the Spearmen. Very, very good stuff there. And we were able to fend off the Dragon Princes. So the Dragonback Slayers plus the 2 groups of Thunders doing a very good job. And even though they're beat up, we have 55 models here, we have 31 here. We're going to be turning and just applying some withering fire onto the Sisters of Averlorn. We also do get a Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and I don't know why I used the Hammer of Carrick Draz on those guys, but it sounds cool. And you can see they're just getting absolutely capped by these Thunders, taking quite a bit of damage, definitely getting some good value. And for the most part, these guys should be broken right now. They're going to be wavering and probably retreating off the battlefield. Balance of Power is a little bit in my favor. Certainly could come back from my opponent. Lariel's kind of just sitting here using her healing, but the Giant Slayers have collapsed, and that's what I like about Giant Slayers. They're such a cool unit. I mean, really good AP. If they have to fight elite infantry, they can. Obviously, this is probably the worst case scenario. I don't want them fighting spears, but at this point, they were so embroiled in combat, I was kind of like, I'm just going to leave them and let them fight. But the Hammer is performing pretty well, fighting to the bitter end, down to 14 models, definitely doing some good stuff with the support of the Runesmiths. Obviously, from a cost standpoint, it's a lot of gold here, these 2 units, and the Swordmasters are still doing very well for their cost. But again, the Rune Magic helping me to pull ahead here a little bit. Faw's Protection is going to be going down on these guys, but they only have 17 models, and they're probably going to buckle here. Dragon Princes are coming back in, so I decided to turn my Thunder firing squad. We're going to be trying to pick them off, but they're probably going to be able to pound these Hammers out and finish them off. But maybe we'll be able to get them. Here comes the charge. Very, very devastating stuff into the very tattered Thunder, so the Hammers here are undoubtedly going to break from that charge. Runesmith will stand and fight. Very durable. He has 120 armor himself against the relatively low AP of the Dragon Princes. And the rest of the Hammers are going to be pushing, and Alariel is going to certainly be able to outrun those guys. But for the most part, it is going to be a high elf route. using the Runes of Wrath and Ruin to apply some ranged damage onto the sisters, really needing to finish those guys off, because if they were able to sit and shoot at my very beat up hammers here, that would be pretty unfortunate. It might give my opponent a gateway back into the game here, but I really don't think he has enough stopping power left on the battlefield to deal with my elite, runesmiths and things like that. So the Dragonback Slayers do engage. The Giant Slayers are able to kind of drag a couple of them down. They're very, very beat up here. You can see some grudges are certainly being settled. And, as I was playing this, it kind of reminded me of that scene in Lord of the Rings when they're, trying to get some Mordor, and, like, you see all the elven... In the swamp, you remember all the elves that are, like, immortalized from... Not immortalized, but kind of entombed from that battle from a different age. It was kind of cool looking. But yeah, I really like that build. It was quite a bit of fun. The hammers performed well. 118, that's pretty funny. They got the exact same amount. 85 and 49. Thunders did well. I was a little bit sloppy with protecting them, but I liked my opponent's build. I think if he had just cut the bolt throwers... I don't know. They did good HP damage, but they didn't seem to deal with a lot of models. I don't know. That's something to think about. I kind of want to try that. I feel like the spread fire mode on the bolt throwers is a little bit ineffective. It's kind of like a Haggard Hellstorm rocket battery, but yeah, I don't know. Something to give a try. I think that one of the better ways to beat the dwarves is just to go heavy infantry. Like if he had like 4 swordmasters and just like maybe 1 sister and a couple like more cav units, I think it would have been much harder. But it was cool to see an experimental build. And honestly, it was a really close game. Certainly could have gone either way with a couple, different micro situations. And yeah, the Dragon Princes we were able to handle pretty well. I'm really glad I brought those Thunders. And of course, Slayers just doing Slayer things. My Dwarven Cav were able to get around and do huge work, but really like using like elite Dwarven builds. I feel like people don't expect it and seem to pay its dues. And also maybe the bolt throwers might be able... I wonder how effective these things would be at sniping Dwarven artillery. So for example, had I brought like the Goblobber and a cannon, or even a what is it called, an organ gun, I feel like the Eagle Claw bolt throwers might have been able to snipe them. So maybe that's the direction he was going, because most Dwarven players, you rarely see hammers. They're not a very common pick, so maybe that was the direction he was going. But anyways, very well played to my opponent, Indigo Freak. Look forward to running into you again on ladder, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this Dwarf vs. High Elf grudge match. Have an excellent night, guys, and take care.